Once upon a time in the kingdom of Valdrith, a villain named Lord Malagar ruled the dark lands beyond the shimmering borders of the royal capital. He was feared by all, whispered about in trembling voices. A sorcerer of great power, he commanded legions of shadowy creatures, cursed the lands with storms, and demanded tribute from those unfortunate enough to dwell near his domain. The kingdom's rulers, a trio of mighty heroes blessed by the gods themselves, were celebrated throughout the land. King Alden, the stalwart warrior, Queen Lysara, the brilliant enchantress, and Sir Garrick, the noble knight, shone as beacons of righteousness. Their tales of valor spread far and wide. Their portraits adorned banners and murals. It was they who had long held Malagar at bay, ensuring that he never set foot upon the golden streets of Valdrith. For years, Malagar played his role as the villain. He launched raids, conjured tempests, and tested the strength of the so-called heroes. But one day, after a skirmish left him wounded, he found himself in disguise among the very people he had terrorized. The dark cloak of anonymity shielded him as he wandered through the villages, curious to witness how these supposed heroes protected their subjects. To his surprise, the people of Valdrith were not thriving under their noble rulers. Fields lay fallow, roads cracked and broken. In the marketplaces, merchants haggled desperately, their wares overpriced, their profits snatched away by royal tax collectors. In the alleys, orphaned children shivered beneath tattered blankets, ignored by the well-dressed lords and ladies who strutted through the cobbled streets. The grand castle loomed high above, its spires glittering with wealth, yet below it hunger and sickness spread like a slow poison. Malagar watched as King Alden rode past the suffering commoners without a glance, his golden armor shining, but his eyes indifferent. Queen Lysara entertained nobles with her spells, weaving illusions for their delight, while the city's mages struggled to find enough resources for even the simplest healing charms. Sir Garrick, ever the gallant knight, spent his days in tournaments, proving his might against fellow warriors while the people had no defenders against roving bandits who stole what little they had left. Rage boiled within Malagar's heart. These were the heroes he had fought against for so long, champions who turned their backs on their own people. For years he had been painted as the villain, but it seemed the true darkness lay within the golden walls of Valdrith itself. And so, for the first time, his hatred burned not for the kingdom but for its rulers. That night, under the silver glow of the moon, Malagar made his choice. He gathered his strength, summoned his magic, and wove a new purpose into his being. He would be no villain, not anymore. If the heroes would not protect their own people, then he would. His shadowy creatures, once unleashed to terrorize, now guarded the roads from thieves and raiders. His storms, once weapons of destruction, brought needed rain to the withering crops. He sent his minions into the streets, distributing food, clothing, and medicines stolen from the overflowing royal stores. Where the kingdom's rulers ignored cries for help, he answered them in silence, a spectre of justice unseen but deeply felt. Rumors began to spread. The darkness that had once plagued the land was now its salvation. The villain of old was turning into something else, something the people had never known before, a hero who needed no praise, no titles, no gilded throne. And as whispers of Malagar's deeds reached the castle, the so-called heroes began to feel fear, not for their kingdom, but for their own power. The rulers sent their soldiers, their finest warriors, even their best mages to destroy Malagar's growing influence, but none could match him. The people, long abandoned by their heroes, now stood with the one they had once feared. They hid his followers, carried messages between his allies, and fought back against the royal decree that named him a traitor. Their loyalty was no longer to the throne, but to the unseen guardian in the shadows. It did not take long for the walls of Valdrith to crack. The people, emboldened by Malagar's defiance, rose up. The streets filled with voices, with hands wielding tools turned to weapons, with banners marked not with the royal crest but with the sigil of the so-called villain. The castle doors, once seen as the gateway to a paradise, became the final barrier of tyranny. As the uprising grew, Malaga knew that the battle for the kingdom was not merely one of swords and sorcery. It was a battle of hearts. The people needed not just a leader, but a vision of what Valdrith could become. So he did more than fight. He taught them. He showed the farmers how to enrich the soil with spells, instructed the artisans in the forgotten arts of enchanting their wares, and guided scholars to uncover lost knowledge. He built places of healing where magic and medicine worked together to mend wounds and cure sickness. Under his watch, the kingdom did not merely rebel, it transformed. The final battle came not from Malaga's desire, but from the desperation of those who had once sat upon the throne. King Alden, Queen Lysara, and Sir Garrick could no longer ignore the tide rising against them. They led their armies against Malaga and his growing rebellion, wielding the full might of their divine gifts. Fire and steel clashed against darkness and resolve, but the people of Valdrith had chosen their true protector. When the Golden Throne fell, it was not Malaga who claimed it. He had no need for crowns or titles. Instead, he walked the lands he once sought to rule by force, now ruling only by trust. He rebuilt villages, nurtured the soil, ensured that justice was swift but fair. His magic no longer cast fear but hope. And so, the villain of Valdrith became its true hero, not by seeking power, but by giving it back to those who had been denied it for far too long. His legend did not live in grand murals or royal decrees, but in the laughter of children no longer afraid, in the fields that flourished under steady hands, and in the whispered tales of a shadow that once loomed over the land, not to consume it, but to shelter it from the storms of tyranny.